It's Rick Jones, and it's time to get back up on the boat from the bridge. Today's theme is all about legends. And my guest angler, who also is a really great fisherman, is the legendary Bill Battle. You're all in for a treat today listening to Bill talk about his amazing career. We'll get back up on the old soapbox and return to the road on the road with Rick. So without further ado, let's get this party started. Willie Nelson wrote and sang one of my favorite songs called My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys. It's from both the movie and the soundtrack from The Electric Horseman, which starred Robert Redford, Jane Fonda, and Willie himself. Well, my heroes have always been coaches. I simply love coaches. I've been blessed with a memorable career working on multiple projects, but my all-time favorite project was creating the Final Four Coaches Club. When I first went to the National Association of Basketball Coaches, I asked my boss, Jim Haney, I said, what have we done for the coaches that coached in the Final Four? If you're a college basketball fan, you know all about the road to the Final Four. Candidly, it's what every coach hopes to attain in his career. It's important to get to the Final Four. Well, it turned out we hadn't done anything for them. Well, I'm a big fan of the Masters. And one of the great traditions at the Masters is the past champions dinner. And for those of you listening out there that don't know anything about the Masters or golf, what they do is they take the winner from the past year's Masters, and on Tuesday night, they bring in every living champion into the clubhouse, and they serve a dinner that is hosted by the previous year's winner. And he actually picks the menu. I thought that was such a cool job. And remember what they do at the Masters, too, is when you win the Masters, sure, you win a big check, and sure, you get the prestige of being a Masters champion forever. But what you covet the most is the green jacket. You get the green jacket. So I wanted to emulate that same kind of a deal. And so we created the Final Four Coaches Club. It's a lunch held on Saturday before the semifinals. It's a private lunch. It's only open to a coach that has coached in the Final Four and one guest. That could be his spouse or his grandson or whoever he wants to bring. The first year we did it was in 2006, and it was hosted by Roy Williams from North Carolina, who had won the previous year. And Roy got to pick the menu, and he loves Charleston. He spends a lot of time down here at Isle of Palms playing golf. And so he picked what we call Frogmore stew, or what he called a low country boil. But we also had a side of steak for those that didn't like seafood. ESPNU was our sponsor in that first year, and we gave every coach in attendance their jacket. It was a blue blazer that had basketball lining, orange lining on the inside, had their name and the years that they were in the Final Four. Each jacket contained buttons, and the buttons were little basketballs. And here's the only difference. If you got to the Final Four, your buttons were silver. But if you won the championship, your buttons were gold. And I remember years later, Billy Donovan got his, and because he didn't win, and got a silver one. And when he won the championship, he sent us the jacket back and said, put my gold buttons on it, which we really, really liked. Very, very special first event. We had a tremendous number of great coaches that were there. Ben Carnival was the oldest. A lot of you may not have heard of Ben Carnival. If you're a South Carolina fan, you may remember Corky Carnival, his son, who's one of Bobby Crimmins' best friends, was Bobby's teammate under Coach McGuire at South Carolina. Ben Carnival was a legendary coach and athletic director, a longtime athletic director at the Naval Academy. People didn't know this. In 1947, he took North Carolina to the Final Four. And so he came, Corky brought him that year. Ben was in a wheelchair. And he died not long after that, and they buried him in his Final Four Coaches Club jacket, which is a pretty special thing. I remember when we gave out the jackets, we gave them in the order of the years. You know, we went back to the oldest. And so Ben Carnival got the first one because from 1947, and we went on through. Coach Wooden was there. Dean Smith was there. We had just so many legends that were there. And I remember when we gave Big John Thompson, his very large jacket, followed by Raleigh Massimino with his very small jacket. Well, you may remember that Raleigh had beaten John in '85 in that great upset at Rupp Arena in Lexington, Kentucky. Well, John got his, and as Raleigh got up to get his, John growled at him. Arr. It was one of the great moments. It was a very special time. Later on, our friend Chris Velarde, who you heard from a few weeks ago, and Warner created the 75th anniversary ladder. We gathered all the guys that had coached in the Final Four, that had climbed the ladder, that actually won the championship, and we posed them in front of a very special commemorative ladder. We've lost a number of those great Final Four coaches since that first event. Some friends and legends like Gene Bartow and Dean Smith, John Wooden, Guy Lewis. And this year we've lost two giants, both the great John Thompson and the great Lute Olson. That was really a highlight of my career, was creating the Final Four Coaches Club. Later on, I had a chance to work with some partners, with Shaul Zislin and Vince Thompson, who's been on our show a couple times, on a program for Gulf Shores and Orange Beach. We took BP oil spill money and we bought a sponsorship of the Southeastern Conference. And as part of that, we created an event down in Gulf Shores called the SEC Beach Fest. And part of the joy of doing that project was working with a bunch of ex-great football coaches like Vince Dooley and Frank Broyles and Pat Dye and Philip Fulmer, Jerry Stovall, Billy Brewer, Bill Curry, just a wonderful time. We did a series of commercials using those old coaches. One of my favorites was Coach Dye did a talk where we must protect this house. Auburn is an Under Armour school, and you thought he was talking about Auburn, and then we panned away and realized he was talking to the little boy who was building the sandcastle on the beach. We must protect this house. And then the little boy turned to Coach Dye and said, "Coach Dye, do we need to worry about the tide?" And he said, "Son, we don't ever worry about the tide." It's one of my favorite commercials ever. We also did a wonderful commercial with a bunch of the coaches sitting around talking about Gulf seafood. And they all wore their colors of their schools. So Coach Dye is in Auburn blue, and Coach Fulmer's in Tennessee orange, and Coach Stovall's in LSU yellow, and so forth. And so we rehearsed, about Gulf seafood. So we come to Coach Dye, and he says, "I think I'll have the blue crabs." And then we come to Coach Stovall. He says, "I'll have the yellowfin tuna." And Coach Fulmer said, "I'll have the orange roughy." And then Frank Broyles, who was the longtime coach in AD at Arkansas, his line was, "I think I'll have the red snapper." Yes, coaches from Decatur, Georgia, I can do him pretty well. "I had the red snapper." So we rehearsed it over and over. And now it's time to go live. Roll, Coach Dye. "I think I'll have the blue crabs. I think I'll have the yellowfin tuna. I think I'll have the orange roughy." We come to Coach Broyles, and he goes, "I think I'll have the fried catfish." I said, Coach, he said, "Rick, I just wanted the fried catfish." I said, "Coach, we'll get you the fried catfish. Just read your lines." We lost Coach Broyles a few years ago. Just was one of my favorite human beings on the planet. Great guy. And we lost Coach Dye this summer. Another wonderful, wonderful coach. I love coaches, especially the old ones. Yes, my heroes have always been coaches. Speaking of a legend, my guest today is Bill Battle, the former football coach and athletic director and the founder and CEO of the Collegiate Licensing Company. Let's welcome my dear friend Bill Battle to the bridge. Hey, Bill, thank you so much for being with us today from the bridge.
Oh, great to be with you, Rick. It's a long time no see, and feels good to catch up with you.
Well, 2020 has been a year that we've talked to a lot of people by phone or Zoom, but we haven't been able to be with folks. So I'm hoping this thing will end and you and I can go do some fishing together. That would be great.
Well, I got to tell you, my Mike's daughter is having a wedding in Charleston in March, so maybe we can set that up.
That'd be great. I'm hoping we can be together by March, and but we can certainly be together on a boat catching some speckled trout. I think that. Bill, let's start with the beginning. You know, you were raised around sport. Your dad was an AD, raised in Birmingham. Sports was a big part of your life. Did you always know you wanted to work in sport?
No, I never knew what I wanted to do. Was raised around sports. My dad was a Birmingham Southern. I spent a lot of time over there swimming and playing ping pong and doing all the things that you can do in a small college. And when I got to be a little older, the fraternities would put me in sometimes in the softball games when they got out of hand or they didn't have enough players. And so it was, I grew up around sports and I always loved them and knew that I wanted to be around them. And I was wanted to play all year round. So that was before you started spending all your time on one sport. And so I enjoyed playing all sports.
What made you go to Alabama?
Coach Bryant, at the end of the day, Auburn was the king of the hill. In 1957, Auburn was 10-0. They were on probation because they had bought a player in Gunnersville, but they went 10-0 and won the national mythical championship, even though they couldn't go to a bowl. They beat Alabama 40-0, and nobody scored 40 points back in those days. So they fired Coach Whitworth and hired Coach Bryant. And so Coach Bryant came in 58, and I was a senior in high school in 59. Bud Moore, who was a teammate of mine at West End High School, went to Alabama under Coach Whitworth, and he experienced that first spring at Alabama, which it wasn't as bad as they made out to be at Texas A&M, but it was tough, and they ran a lot of the riffraff off, I guess, and so I kept up with him about what was going on. But again, Auburn was the winning team, and the first year, Coach Bryant in '58, Coach Bryant went 5-4-1 from 2-7-1 the year before, and the worst he got beat was the opening game against LSU, who had Paul Dietzel and Billy Cannon, and went on to win the national championship. And they were in the game till the fourth quarter, but they got beat 10-3, I think, or 10-3 it was. So anyway, in '59, my senior year, we signed. We were the first full class to sign with Coach Bryant, and so we got there a little after the hard times, and I think he took care of us a little bit because we were his guys, and we knew, we had enough time to know what he was doing and how he was doing it, and bought into it. And so anyway, that was the big difference. I thought if you could play 4 years for Coach Bryant, you'd really be something, and that proved to be true.
Now, in your era, freshmen were not eligible. So, there were great freshman teams all over the South. Just talk a little bit about that.
Hey, Rick, here's an interesting stat from that. So, Alabama got beat 40-0 in '57. They got beat by less than a touchdown in '58, and our class came in '59. So in '59, '60, '61, and '62, 4 years, how many points do you think Auburn scored on Alabama during those 4 years.
Guy, after scoring all those points, what did they score? 30 points?
None.
None.
0.
Wow.
They didn't
Wow.
score. But back then, it was a different game, and you played both ways. It was limited substitution. If you came out twice in the quarter, you couldn't go back in. But we won 10-0, 3-0, and then the last 2 years we won in the 30s-0.
Well, obviously, Coach Bryant was a big influence on you. Now you're a senior. Is this when you started thinking about coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a senior, even when I was a junior, we won the national championship in 1961, my junior year, and we should have won it in '62. We lost it. We just gotten to be number one, and lost to Georgia Tech over in Atlanta, 7-6, and we're in field goal range at the end of the game. And he caught, and Namath got hurt, and Jack Herbert was in the game, and we called a pass, and actually they threw it to me. I was a tight end on that formation, and they threw it to the wing. The wingback was curling, and I was running the flat route, and Jack threw it high, and I barely tipped it, and it landed right in the cornerback's hands, and we lost the game. That field goal would have won, and but anyway, I knew, and going back to West End High School, I was really fortunate that I got scholarship offers from Georgia Tech. Was the first one that offered me, Bob Coach Dodd, and Auburn, of course. Auburn and Alabama offered me, and Florida and Tennessee had offered to have me up for visits, and I decided I was going to stay in state, and didn't do that. And then it got down to playing for Coach Bryant. But my high school team, West End High School, won 6 games in 4 years, and success is defined however you define it, and it's different as you go from age to age. And when you think you get there, you never get there. You got to either get better or you get worse from there. So success at West End High School my senior year, I never will forget our high school newspaper at the end of the season said, "West End in successful grid season, 4-4-1." We'd won 4 games out of the 6 that we'd lost. We'd only won 2 the previous 3 years, so 4 was really good in that year.
And then you go to Alabama and have great success, obviously. So now you want to coach. What'd you do when you got out?
Well, I looked around, and I wanted to. I could have stayed at Alabama as a graduate assistant, but I I wanted to go somewhere else and make new relationships and learn a different system. And so I looked around, and Bud Wilkinson at Oklahoma had a great program, and he was also the chairman of President Kennedy's physical fitness program. And so before my senior year, I wrote Coach Wilkinson a letter and asked if I could be a graduate assistant out there. And so I never heard from him, and I forgot about it as the season went on. And as fate would have it, we ended up playing Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl. And so we beat Oklahoma, and back then they still had the party for both teams after the game. And back then, everybody would go. Later on, they quit having it because the losing team quit coming. But anyway, Coach Wilkinson and his staff were there. And so Coach Bryant took me over. He knew about it. He took me over to meet Coach Wilkinson. And I thought he had forgotten about it. Maybe he had. Maybe Coach Bryant reminded him. But anyway, I asked him when I met him, and he said, "Yeah, we'd be glad to have you come out as a graduate assistant." So, all right. So when I was at Oklahoma, I heard that some of the Oklahoma players in the past had gone to West Point to coach football, and I was looking for a place to coach. And the Army football teams, I was a ROTC graduate and had 2 years of active duty ahead of me. I got deferred from active duty for a year to go to graduate school. And so I did that. And I didn't know where West Point was. I was shocked when I went home that night and looked in the encyclopedia and saw it was in New York. But I knew that Paul Dietzel was there. Coach Dietzel had shocked the world and left LSU back in the early 60s after winning the national championship and gone back to West Point, where he had coached earlier, and thought that he could do what Earl Blake did. And that was a mistake because times changed, and the 5-year requirement to serve and the Vietnam War was cranking up, and people didn't want to go in the military. But I got my orders changed. Coach, a couple of weeks later, I guess they checked me out with Coach Bryant, and Coach Dietzel's right-hand man, George Terry, called me and said we could work it out. So I got my orders changed from an artillery unit in Jasper, Alabama, to the Army Athletic Association in West Point, New York, which was one of the better moves of my life because that was 2 great years. We worked hard there and long hours as coaches do. And again, fortunately, I was the freshman defensive coordinator the first year. And then the varsity receivers coach, Frank Gibson, was a military man and a great guy. And his time was up, and he was moved on to another place of duty. And so that opened up the receivers job, and I had worked with varsity coaches as much as I could to help them and to help me learn, Army's defense when I was coordinating the plebe defense. And so anyway, Coach Dietzel made me the varsity receivers coach, and that was a whole different world. And I believe it was that year, or maybe the year before, that the rules changed from limited substitution to unlimited substitution. So the whole game changed. And so being on a varsity staff during that change was a great education for me. So anyway, it was a great experience. It was really hard recruiting, but it was a great learning experience, and recruiting at probably the hardest place in America to recruit.
Well, you had a great staff there, if I remember. There was all kinds of people that went on to be successful head coaches.
Yeah, a lot of them came later, as like I did. Bill Parcells and a lot of guys came in. On that staff was Jim Valek, who was the guy that went down and he was working for Trump and the New York, whatever they were, that USFL team. And
the Generals, New Jersey Generals, yeah.
Yeah, recruited Herschel Walker to leave Georgia and go up there. But Valek and Bill Shalosky was the line coach, and Larry Jones, who I hired later, was on that staff, and George Terry was a great defensive coach. But anyway, Bill Rao was there, and so.
And were you able to get your military service done during that period? Yeah.
My 2 years was my military service. So I saved up. I didn't take any leave. You got 30 days leave a year. So I had 60 days, and I didn't get out of the service. My termination date wasn't until the middle of June. So I in hopes of maybe getting a job, I had those 60 days carved out that I could go down to somebody's spring practice. And then another long story that's too long to tell, I ended up getting hired on Doug Dickey's staff at Tennessee. So I went down. I did go down to Tennessee for their spring practice, and then when I came back to West Point, Coach Dietzel and the whole staff had gone to South Carolina. So when I left, he was the head coach at Army, and then when I got back, he was the
head coach of South Carolina.
South Carolina.
That's crazy. You know, you talk about the military service. I just recently read a really good book called The Cloudbuster 9. and it's a book about the Second World War in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, that was a base for a lot of the fighter pilots. Ted Williams actually trained there, and a bunch of guys. But one of the interesting stories that came out of that book was they decided in World War II that they needed to recruit coaches to train our servicemen. They felt like coaches were going to be the best people to do that, and they had a recruiting guy come to the American Football Coaches Association convention and make a plea to coaches to please help us train servicemen. And the story goes that the guy went back to Washington with really no idea how he was going to do it. And about 2 days later, a guy knocked on his door and said, "I'm here." And he said, "Well, what do you mean you're here?" He said, "Well, I'm here to coach and to help these people." and the guy wasn't even ready. And he said to his wife, "I don't know what to do." And she said, "Well, you need to, first of all, we need to feed him dinner." And that was Coach Bryant.
Oh, no.
Yes, yes.
How about that?
Coach Bryant had given up an assistant's job to come help Uncle Sam. And Coach Bryant ended up living with this guy at his house in Washington until they could assign him someplace. And then he and a bunch of other great coaches of that era all were basically the training corps and for all these servicemen, which I think is pretty fascinating. So I want to say one more thing. I know that you told me before when you were at West Point that you would often take the train and go to the city, and maybe that's where you kind of fell in love with theater, that you had a chance to go to the Broadway theater and stuff like that. And obviously you had a granddaughter that loved the theater too. So was that where you kind of started loving to go to the theater? Yeah,
absolutely. I was there for 2 years, and our fellow graduate assistants, or whatever you call them, our assistant coaches, tried to get me to go for a year and a half, and all I could think about going to a play was what I'd seen at West End High School. I didn't want any part of that. And they finally, with 6 months to go in my service, they dragged me down, and it wasn't a train. We would drive. It was only 60 miles, and we drove down the Palisades Parkway, which is a great parkway that the donors that funded that parkway made it a requisite that there be no advertising on it. And I think to this day, there's still no advertising. But anyway, we would drive down and go to Mama Leone's, who was a great Italian restaurant that had the proprietors had two sons that were West Point graduates, and so they always took care of us. And then we would go to the play, and the first play that I saw was Cactus Flower with Lauren Bacall, and that was amazing. And then we went back a couple of weeks later, and I didn't want to go because it was a musical, and I didn't think I'd like a musical, but it was Superman, and it was the most high energy, people swinging across the stage on wires, and I mean it was incredible. And then later on, so that's where I started my love. And then as we would go back every year, we went to Les Mis, and I wanted comedies and light ending things, but we could only get tickets to Les Mis, and then I got captured by Les Mis. That's still my favorite play. I've seen it 10 times, and that's where I fell in love with the theater.
That's really cool. All right, so now you end up on Doug Dickey's staff at Tennessee, and he up and leaves and goes to Florida. And there you are.
Yeah, so we're playing. We had won the conference in 67 and 69, and he had turned it around, and Alabama was the king, and Doug did a great job in getting Tennessee back to the top. And so we went down to the Gator Bowl, interestingly enough, to play Florida. And the rumor swirled that Doug was going to Florida, and Florida had a good year. They had Carlos Alvarez was a great wide receiver, and John Reeves was a great quarterback, and and they beat us. They beat us 14-13. We were in the red zone 3 or 4 times and couldn't get it in, and just should have won the game so many different ways. And I didn't believe that he would go. While we were at practice, Coach Woodruff came up to me, our athletic director, came up to me on the practice field one day and said, "I want to have lunch with you." And I said, "Okay." I'd never been asked to go to lunch with the athletic director before. I was assistant coach, coaching receivers. And so we went to Ponte Vedra and had lunch. And he said, "I think there are 3 coaches on our staff that are head coaches. And if Doug leaves, I want to know where you're going to be." This was before cell phones, obviously. "I want to know where you're going to be." So I told him I was going to be at my parents' house in Birmingham. And so I didn't believe he would leave, because we had a good thing going at Tennessee. And sure enough, he decided to leave. And so Coach Woodruff called and said, "Come back to Knoxville." And I went back to Knoxville, and that was one of the more interesting weeks of my life. But we went into the meetings, and it was the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator, and me, and Coach Woodruff was trying to keep the staff together. And so he said, "All right, I think we got a great staff. I think any one of the 3 of you could be head coaches, but we can only name one. And I'm going to leave the room, and I want y'all to see if I name one of you, if you could work for the other one." And so he left the room, and I said, I was the most relaxed candidate in the room. I said, "Well, I'd work for either one." And both of them had come to me and said if they got it, they wanted me to be the offensive coordinator, which I thought was really cool. And so when he left the room, I said, "Well, I could work for either one of you." And I know he ain't got enough guts to hire a 28-year-old guy as the head coach here. And so Jimmy Dunn, the offensive coordinator, said, "Well, yeah, I could do that." And Doug Knotts, who was defensive coordinator, said, "Well, I can't do that. Y'all are both offensive guys, and I need a defensive guy as one of my top 2 assistants." And so Coach Woodruff came back in, so we told him, and he said, "All right, Bill, meet with me at 7:30, and Jimmy at 8:30, and Doug at 9:30. So I went in and met with him, and I'm still relaxed and sitting back with my legs crossed. And about halfway through the conversation, he said, "I think you know who I'm going to name." And I said, "Yeah, I know you're going to name." And he said, "Well, I don't think you do, or you wouldn't answer it like that." And I thought, holy crap, he's talking about me. Anyway, 3 days later, he said, he called and said, "Get your TV clothes on, because we're going." He said, "I need a few days to get this done, so don't do anything and to discourage anybody from leaving." And Jimmy played for him. He was a quarterback for Florida when Coach Woodruff was the AD at Florida, which I thought he was going to do. And we'd all gotten to be close friends, because we all lived out in the same neighborhood, and it was just it was small staff and really close staff, and not very many people like there are today. And so I met Jimmy, and he said, "I'm Coach Woodruff's gotten pressure from somewhere, and I'm announcing today that I'm going to go with Doug down to Florida." So it was Doug and I in the running, and then they named me a few days later. And Andy Hope was the president, and he was a legendary figure, a tall guy who was the greatest guy in the world. And so the interview went something like this. He said, "Well, we never thought about you as the guy, but after reading your reviews and your history, we can see why Bob picked you." And he said, "I want to ask you a couple of questions." I said, "Okay." He said, "You go to church?" I said, "Yes, sir. I'm on the Bearden Board of Methodist Board of Trustees, directors." And he said, "Do you drink?" And I said, "Well, I drink socially." And he had some alcohol problems with the coach in the past. That was a real problem. And he said, "Well, I found that in the alumni meetings and so forth that I go to, I get offered a lot of drinks, and ginger ale works pretty good for me. And he said, but I know you'll do a great job. And that was the end of the interview with the president. So it was pretty short and sweet.
Well, you think about it. I mean, okay, you played for Coach Bryant, you worked for Bud Wilkinson, you worked for Paul Dietzel, and then you worked for Doug Dickey.
Yeah.
I would say that's pretty prepared.
Well, I was there for 4 years and did understand, I knew the players, and the players knew me, and I didn't have any enemies among the players. And so and I thought that I was ready. And, I didn't, there was a lot of things, obviously, I didn't know about being a head coach, and I found out pretty quick that the difference in being an assistant coach and a head coach are really different. And, it was a great learning experience. It was a little bit painful at times, but it was a great learning experience and an overall great experience. I still am close to a lot of the Tennessee people, a lot of the former players. We get together from time to time, and so my experience there was good. We didn't do very well at the end. Did pretty well at the beginning. But we tapered off, and we didn't recruit and develop players as well as we should have, and tapered off at the end.
Well, and the other thing that you ran into was the buzzsaw known as Johnny Majors. I mean, Majors had played there, had gone to Pitt and had success, and I think there was, that kind of drumbeat to bring him back, and you got caught up in that. But then this is how funny your life is. I mean, isn't it?
Well, that's right. But before that, and that was a factor. But the major factor was that Alabama, who Coach Bryant had fallen off recruiting and developing players back in the late '60s, and he went 8-2 and 6-5, 6-5, and he went. We played him. My first game. We played them and beat them 24-0. They had 400 and something yards. They were they had a pro offense. Scott Hunter was quarterback. They they gained about 400 yards of offense against us, but we intercepted 8 passes and shut them out 24-0. First time they'd been shut out in years. And so Coach Bryant secretly, and that was 1970, and in 71, and we beat them 42-14, I think, or beat them bad, and then you've all heard the story about Southern Cal coming in with Sam Cunningham and beating them 42-14 in
Legion Field, right there in Birmingham.
So they had to open up with Southern Cal the next year in 71. And he secretly went to the Wishbone, and he had recruited well, and Johnny Musso and was a team leader, and they had a really good team at that point, and they shocked the world and beat Southern Cal out there. Well, and so from going 6-5 twice, and the newspaper saying the king is dead, and Bryant doesn't understand his players, and he's too old, and blah blah blah. And from 71 to 79, Alabama won more games than anybody ever won in history. And he won the SEC championship 8 out of those 9 years, and won the national championship 3 of those years. So playing Alabama every year during that time wasn't great. I always said, Vince Dooley, man, you're the luckiest guy in the world. You're at Georgia,
and you don't have to play Alabama. That's right.
Play them twice every 10 years.
Yeah.
That's a great place to be.
Yeah. Well, then you come to a big fork in the road. So you're out of coaching. Did you go to work for
Larry Strickland?
Strickland. And wasn't Strickland a basketball coach at one time at Belmont?
Yeah,
coach?
He started the Belmont program.
Yeah.
And he was my first Little League football coach. He played basketball at Birmingham Southern, and I went and watched him when I was a kid play basketball, and And then when I was head coach, he was the head of the Birmingham Touchdown Club, and I was speaking there one day, and he owned at that point Nelson Brantley Glass Company in Birmingham. That was a glass company that sold auto replacement windshields, and they did storefront and other construction kind of stuff. And so he picked me up at the airport, took me through Nell Brand, and so I spoke at the quarterback club, and he says, "Do the insurers of Tennessee?" And he was a great salesman. He said, "Do the insurers of Tennessee sponsor your television show?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, I want you and I to go in the glass business, and we get the insurers to doing all the auto windshield replacement business with us. We'll make a fortune." I said, "Yeah, I don't want to go in the glass business. I just want to coach football. People leave me alone." And so we didn't do that. And then after I had resigned, Coach Bryant called and said, "Do you know Larry Striplin?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I've been on his board, and I've made a lot of money with the company. He's down in Selma, Alabama, got a window company, and I've made a lot of money with him. I think you can too." And I thought to myself, I ain't going to Selma, Alabama and work for a window company. And I'd about decided I was going to do something else. I had turned down a couple of head coaching jobs and just decided I was going to try to do something different, and it didn't work. I thought I could always get back in coaching somewhere, and but I was committed to trying. And so anyway, another long story. I ended up going to Selma, Alabama, and in the 6 years that I was there, from '77 to '83, our company went from 2 companies doing $12 million to 10 companies doing $60 million. So again, it was a great business educational experience for me, which I had no business background, and that was very helpful to me in my career. And in a very strange and long story, I ended up starting what turned out to be the Collegiate Licensing Company, and started licensing college, managing their trademark licensing programs.
Well, you had told me a story that Coach Bryant was about to break Stagg's record and ask you to help him, and that you'd also, I think you mentioned to me one time that you kind of picked the brains of the guys at Golden Bear, Jack Nicklaus's company, about
Yeah.
licensing. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we had so our first client was Coach Bryant, and he was on the board. And one day he came to a board meeting. This was 1981, and he came to a board meeting, and we had a board meeting every month. We had one month that was the window company, which I had to run the board meeting, and the next month it was the glass company, and the next month was the holding company. And the 2 operating companies paid the board members $500, and the holding company paid the board members $1,000. So I picked Coach Bryant up, and I had to run the board meeting, but I had to also go pick Coach Bryant up to Holiday Inn. I was shocked that he would come to a board meeting on a Tuesday of during the fall, but he did. But anyway, I picked him up, and as we were walking up the stairs, he said, "I'm going to change agents. Guys in New York aren't doing anything for me." And he was managed at that time by IMG, and I couldn't believe that he did anything other than football. I couldn't believe he had a manager. And so that's all I could think about during that board meeting. And I was nervous about those board meetings because we had people that knew a whole lot more about the construction business and our business than I did. And I had to prepare hard for those board meetings to act like I knew what I was doing. But all I could think about was, and if Alabama won 9 games the next year, he became the all-time winningest coach. So all I could think about was, hey, here's Newt Rockne about to change agents, and we could do for Coach Bryant maybe what Golden Bear did for Jack Nicklaus. So after the board meeting, I went back down to the car with him, and I said, "Coach, I don't know anything about the agency business, but I know about you, and we got this little company that has been working in trademark licensing, and I believe we can help you. In his old low gravelly voice, he said, I ain't got nothing to sell. Best in the business, been trying to sell me for years. All I want somebody to take my request for speaking engagements and tell them I can't come. And I said, well, I said, Coach, we can handle that. So we signed an exclusive agency agreement to do everything commercially for Coach Bryant except his radio and TV show. And I asked him about that, and I said, how much are you making? And he said, well, I think I made $25,000. I said, Coach, Fran Kersey made $50,000 on his Monday night radio call-in show. And he said, well, Golden Flake and Coca-Cola have been with me for years, and I ain't asking them for more money. And that's the kind of guy he was. He loved to make money, but he didn't want to make it off his friends, I guess. And so anyway, so we had learned. I had learned a little bit about licensing because on this. Well, that was again part of the long story, but we had become licensees of Jack Nicklaus, Golden Bear, and also Disney, and even IMG with Chris Everett Lloyd. And so we learned a lot about licensing from a licensee standpoint. And then we learned when Coach Bryant came on board, we learned a lot about licensing from a licensor's standpoint. So I had a little background in understanding licensing, which not many people understood back in those days. And so Coach Bryant led to Alabama, which led to Ole Miss. And then Bill McClellan was at Clemson, and he got it. And he got me before the ACC, all the ADs. And then in '82, as you remember, Danny Ford won the national championship. And so Bill McClellan called me and he said, man, we got tiger paws coming out our ears. Can you help us? When can you come? And I said, man, we'll leave today. And so we went over and we got Clemson, and then we got 7 of the 8 ACC schools. And so that was how we got started. And we did all that in Selma. And then later we moved to Atlanta.
Well, I think people that are listening don't realize that all these years people were just taking school marks and doing what they wanted to with them, and the schools were not receiving any royalties. They weren't creating the revenue off of their marks, and y'all were able to do that. I want to tell everybody a story that I heard, and you can corroborate it. Somebody told me that Coach Bryant, when he filmed his TV show, he filmed it at the Golden Flake headquarters there in Birmingham, and in the conference room, and he'd eat Golden Flake potato chips and drink Cokes, when he did the thing, and he'd mumble, and there'd be like 3 touchdowns, and he'd talk about Wilbur Jackson's mama or Johnny Musso's mama or whatever, but he smoked those unfiltered Chesterfields, and one day this lady called in and said, I can't get my potato chips to smoke like they do on the Coach Bryant show. I've put them in the microwave. I put them in the oven. and it was because he had that ashtray behind the thing. And I just thought that was the greatest story ever, man. Of course, people don't, I tell people this and they think I'm lying. At his television show was the number 1 ranked show in the state of Alabama over NFL games. I mean,
he was a great communicator, and through that television show, he could recruit, he could raise money, he could schmooze families, he could do a lot of different things that he was. I don't know if he knew what he was doing or not, but he was doing it, and he was doing it right. Let me tell you one other Coach Bryant TV show story. So my sophomore year. And he had never beaten Tennessee at this point in time. He went, and it made me feel a little better. When I did my book, I researched, and he was 7 years at Kentucky and had Babe Pirelli 4 years, and they didn't score on Tennessee. And Coach Bryant went 6 years against General Neyland and never beat him, and he tied him once, and then his 7th year against Harvey Robinson, he beat Tennessee, and then he went to Texas A&M, and I think they tied Tennessee in the Gator Bowl before he came to Alabama. But so my sophomore year, we go up to Knoxville to play, and he was nervous during Tennessee week, and so we go up there, and we get behind 14-0 in the first 5 minutes, and we lose 21-7. And the next week is the worst week of my life. So we didn't have we were in the dorm, and that was 4 cell phones. We got 1 phone in the dorm and no TVs. So we would all go to different places, sorority houses or friends' houses, which nobody had friends back in those days. So, but to see the TV show, to see how he was. So he's sitting up there with those Cokes and Golden Flakes. And I think Charlie Thornton or Roy Farrell, I forget who the moderator was.
Charlie, yeah.
He said, "Well, it was a tough day in Knoxville, Coach, but we still got those good Golden Flake and Coca-Colas." And he reached out and shoved them back aside. And he said, "I don't know about that, Charlie, but I'll tell you one thing. Our players been sitting in that conference room wearing that sweet-smelling aftershave lotion and looking at their watches, ready to get over on sorority row. And this week we're going to run off the riffraff." And golly, Bum, you talk about some players getting their rear ends tightened up that week. That may have been the worst week of my life, because I was a sophomore defense playing both ways, but they ran the single wing and ran it really well back then. And they had a all conference, all American blocking back that bore my ass out that day. And so I went way down to dropped down about 4 teams on the depth chart. And I got back up in the next few weeks, but it was a pretty tough experience. And that TV show indelibly imprinted in my mind.
Yeah, he let everybody know what was coming, and then he proved that it was going to come, and that kind of thing. Well, Bill, you built a great company at CLC, and I mean, an amazing company, and then you ended up, selling the company, and then kind of like Coach Bryant, when he said, "Mama called," when Mal Moore got ill, you had a chance to go back to Alabama.
I did, and I didn't want to go. I never wanted to be an athletic director, and I tried to think of somebody that would be better. And they said we hadn't interviewed anybody but you, and so I agreed to go over there, and I still didn't know if I was going to do it. And I went over there and met with Dr. Witt, who was now the chancellor, and Judy Bonner was the brand new president, but she wasn't in on the meetings that I had with Paul Jr. and Fess St. John, who was the faculty, or who was the trustee in charge of athletics, and Dr. Witt, and I wanted to meet with Coach Saban, and I did, and he was great. And so anyway, I went to they had a president's cabinet meeting, and I was on the cabinet, and the what it took to get on the cabinet was pay $3,000 a year. It wasn't something that you really earned, but I guess you had to be invited. But anyway, so I went, and we started about 1 o'clock and ended about 5 o'clock, and we were in meetings all day, and they were good meetings, but they were presentations of faculty and students and Dr. Bonner, and my heart was palpitating because, man, I didn't like meetings, and I thought, man, if I take this job, this is what every day of my life is going to be, and I decided I wasn't going to do it, and so anyway, I met one of the trustees who said some really impactful things that changed my mind. I don't think she knew she needed to change my mind, but I decided after that if I don't do this, I'll regret it the rest of my life, and I would have. And I'm really glad that I did it. It was a great experience, and I enjoyed it. It was 4 years, and And Mel did a great job, and I inherited a great program. It wasn't a broken program by any stretch. And there, as always, there are some things you can improve, and I think we made some improvements in a lot of areas that needed it. But the structure and the framework was there, and the coaches, for the most part, was there. Although I hired 5 coaches in my short time there, is 4 years. But it was a great experience, and we've after the first year, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, and but I never missed a day of work, and went through some radiation and went through some chemo and lost some weight, and but again, the athletic director is not nearly as high profile as a coach, and so it was the best kept secret. There are no secrets. Dr. Witt said that the athletic department of the University of Alabama is the leakiest place I've ever been. And I believed it after I was trying to hire a basketball coach, because everybody knew what I was doing. And even when we signed Coach Saban after the Texas thing, before we got the press release out, Kirk Herbstreit was announcing the term. So I thought my office was bugged. It may have been. I don't know. But anyway.
We got to close up here. You obviously you fight off cancer, but then you were one of the folks that got COVID. Talk a little bit about that. I want people to understand about this disease.
Yeah, and before that, I had 3 stents put in one artery, and then I had a decompressive laminectomy for stenosis in my back. So I'm a medical miracle, I guess. But then we quarantined really well for all spring, and then we went to a family gathering out in Colorado for a week, and we intended to wear masks and social distance, but in a social family gathering, you break down and get careless, and evidently we did, because Mary and I both got COVID. Her case was a lot different than mine. Hers was more traditional, I guess, with immediate high fever, coughing, pounding, migraine headaches. And for a week, I was asymptomatic. I thought I was going to get through it and then be immune. But after a week, I started going downhill because it went to my lungs. And I ended up, Mary taking me to UAB to the hospital. And I was there for 2 weeks and intensive care for a week. And the intensive care unit there was amazing. And they had all the resources to do what you needed to do. And they got me back out of the hospital instead of going the other way into a ventilator. And I had lost about 15 pounds and was weak as a kitten when I got home. But getting home, I could walk a little more every day. And so I'm 7 or 8 weeks out now, and probably about 60% back to normal. Still have some breathing issues, but I'm walking now up to 30 minutes at a time and 7,500 steps a day, and doing very well, and still fighting to get over it. Mary got over hers, but it took her probably 12 weeks or so to get over hers, and she still has some headaches that she attributes it to. But yeah, it's a tough disease, and particularly if you're my age. I was in that hospital thinking I may not get out of here. Man, I got a lot of things undone that I got to do, because Mary will get overwhelmed with if I die in here. And of course, she couldn't come up there. She's a nurse, and she's been with me in all my illnesses and guided me through the healthcare system, which in this country is pretty. You need an advocate, and you need to do early testing. That was one of the great things that happened to me. I accidentally got diagnosed with multiple myeloma in a routine half day exercise that was going through all kinds of tests. And then a routine chest x-ray, they saw a tumor in my vertebra. And if I hadn't have done that, it might have been 3 or 4 years. And because I had no pain, and I still have never had any pain with it, because the treatment was early and aggressive. So early treatment and aggressive treatment and the right health care and the power of prayer all work in the fight against any disease.
Well, listen, I only got about a third of my way through my questions for you today. I want to have you back at some point. I definitely want to talk about the book. You've had a great life. You've been such a great mentor to me, such a great friend to so many people. And I'm just glad you're doing better. I'm glad Mary's doing better. I want everybody out there to understand you got to socially distance. This disease is not going away right now, and you don't want to get it. So hopefully everybody will learn some of those lessons as we head towards the Thanksgiving and the Christmas holidays, that you got to be smart, especially young people. You got to be smart around older people to make sure that they don't get it. So, Bill, I really, really thank you for being with us today. Again, we'll have you back soon, and I appreciate you being with us from the bridge.
Great to be with you, Rick, and good luck to you, and thanks for all you do for all the many sports that you help in college athletics.
All right. Thank you, pal. We'll talk soon. See you, buddy. Bye-bye. Bye. Let's get back up on the old soapbox. Here's a quote from another legend, Satchel Paige. He said, "Don't look back. Something might be gaining on you." I've never been a big rear view mirror kind of guy. I like looking over the next hill. When I was a kid, my favorite TV character was Flint McCullough, a scout on the old television program Wagon Train. I loved the way he rode over the hill to uncharted destinations at the end of each episode, usually after kissing some pretty girl goodbye. The past is simply that, the past. You can't get any of it back. One of the reasons I like sports so much is because they are full of next chances. There's no time to worry about a missed putt, a grounder that turns into a double play, a bad pass out of bounds, or a drop punt. It's on to the next play. Where are you going next? When are you leaving? Why aren't you going there now? And remember, don't look back. Let's head out on the road with Rick to a truly legendary restaurant, Doe's Eat Place in Greenville, Mississippi. Doe's was started in 1941 by Dominic Doe Signa and his wife, Mamie. Doe's father had actually opened a grocery store at that same location where the restaurant is today in 1903. Before starting Doe's Eat Place, Big Doe spent some time as both a bootlegger and running a honky-tonk. His wife, Mamie, perfected a recipe for Mississippi hot tamales and opened the restaurant in 1941. If you travel throughout the state of Mississippi, you need to eat Mississippi-style hot tamales, and nobody really knows where they came from. They believe they came with Mexican migrant workers back in the 1920s. Doe's Eat Place is now run by both second and third generations of the Doe family. And they, like I said, they still run the place today. One of the things I really love about this place is they have a limited menu. I love restaurants that only do a few things really well. You got two choices and only two choices of starters. You can get the tamales or you can get a bowl of chili. They also have amazing Italian salad that's got everything in it as a second. And then you only have two choices. You can get fried or broiled shrimp or you can get a steak. The shrimp's phenomenal. The steaks are probably even better. You enter the restaurant through the kitchen. You come through the kitchen, which was the original door of the honky tonk. There's a lot of history in that house and some amazing food. This has to be on your bucket list. It's the original Doe's Eat place in Greenville, Mississippi, on the road with Rick. Thanks for being part of a wonderful show today with a true legend, Bill Battle. We'll see you again soon from the bridge.